and welcome to Miss Daisy Patterns' first online tutorial. In our very first ever online tutorial, what we are going to be making today is bunting, which is just like the bunting that's hanging behind me. We are also going to be drafting our own pattern for the bunting, so there's no downloads with this particular tutorial. Now what you will need is you will need an A4 piece of card. The reason why we have the cards is you're going to be drafting your own pattern. You need a ruler, you need a pencil, you'll need a chopstick, there'll be more about this later. You'll need a rotary cutter, that's for cutting the fabric. A small scissors, I use this just because I like to snip off the edges while I'm at the sewing machine. And you will also be using paper scissors. I like to have my paper scissors be a slightly different colour to the other pairs of scissors that I use, just so as that I don't pick up my dressmaking scissors accidentally and then start cutting the paper and dull the scissors. Now fabric wise, what you will need is, material wise, you'll need bias binding, and in this case we're going to be making 5 foot of bunting, so we are using 66 inches of bias binding and 2 fat quarters. Okay, 2 fat quarters, as in I've already cut down one to the size that I need, and we'll be cutting this one down in a little bit. But first things first, what we need to do is we need to draft up the pattern. Now, so what I do is on the grid, I lay this down so the paper is straight, and this is obviously our straight edge here. So getting the ruler, I center it anywhere really, and what I want to do is I want to do 7 inches across. So I put my first dot here, and my second dot is going to be at the 7-inch point. And then what I'm looking for is the midpoint, which is 3.5 inches here. Okay, so then lining up my ruler at that dot, I'm going to go down 7 inches. Okay, so that's there to that point. And in order to make the triangle for the bunting, what we do is we just join up the dots. So we join from here to here, straight up, and we join from this dot to this dot, straight up. Okay. Now getting our paper scissors, we're going to cut out our template. And the reason why we're doing it on cards, because it gives more longevity to the template. You can store it a lot easier. Paper has a tendency to, disintegrate ever so slightly. Okay, so that is our bunting template. Now at this point, what I like to do is I like to write on the template what it is. So it's usually bunting. In this particular pattern, it's a half an inch seam allowance included, which means half an inch here and here. So our finished flag is going to be 6 inches by 6 inches. So in this case here, this is 7 by 7, and I have an example of a finished one right here, okay, which is going to be 6 by 6. Right, so leaving our bunting aside, right, and our template aside for the moment, what we're going to do is we're going to take out our material. Now at this point, what I like to do is I want to have it wrong side to wrong side, or right side to right side. Okay, so I lay fabric right side to right side, and again with the fat quarter it's right side to right side. So that means basically when we've cut it out, we're ready to sew. We don't need to be turning the fabric the right way around or the wrong way around. Now what I'm going to do here is, as you'll see, I have my first piece of material here. I'm going to leave this to the side. This is out of this piece of fabric that I have here. It's 21 inches this way and it is 7 inches this way. I cut down the fat quarter to this size before I lay my template on it. So it's 21 inches by 7. And the reason for this is that if I lay my piece of bunting, my template, flat like this, it fits here. Then when I cut it, which I'm actually going to use my ruler to keep a nice straight edge in it. Okay, so if I cut this out and lay this to the side, and then do the same here. Okay. Obviously you'll be able to do this a lot smoother when you're not doing it backwards for the camera. Okay. What I have here is my first piece of bunting. Now, as you'll see, what's left behind, when I do this and I line this up here again, I actually have another piece of bunting here. So what you get is, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'll end up with 5 individual flags out of a 21 inch by 7 inch piece. Right, so I'll just continue on and I'll cut these pieces. Okay. It's another one. Okay. Perfect. Fits perfectly. Okay. I think I might need to get a slightly sharper blade. And again, on this one, I'm just going to take the easy way out and flip it around. 7. So those pieces are left over. Now, as you see, I actually have my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with only a little bit of wastage here. Okay, now so I'm going to, and because they are right side to right side, I'll actually be able to take this piece as is and directly go to the sewing machine. Now before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the navy one. Now we're at the sewing machine. We have our 10 flags ready to go. In this case, I have white Gutterman thread on the sewing machine and in the bobbin. Usually, because I'm sewing navy bluish and blue and white, and my bias binding has got a kind of a white creamy in it, I'm just going to go with the white today. All the stitching is going to be on the inside. When we iron it flat, you won't really notice it, and it'll save for changing bobbins and thread and everything else. Right, so you take your flag and you go to the sewing machine. You line the side of the flag here up with the side of your presser foot, and you lower the needle into the machine, into the fabric. Now at this stage you have to do 2 or 3 stitches backwards and forwards, running all the way down in your round up, running all the way down to about that point. Now what I usually do is, if I have an issue, I'll just lift up the foot. Now lift up the needle and drop it back in again. Now what you want to do is you want to lift your presser foot, but you want to leave your needle inside, lowered into the fabric. You lift it up, you turn the fabric around, you put the presser foot back down again and you work away. Again, you finish the line of sewing with a couple of stitches forward and back. This now is where your little scissors comes into play. You snip off this, you snip off the edge of this, and you place it to the side. Threads behind, you pick up your next piece. Again, you're going to repeat the process. Line the side of the flag up with the side of your presser foot. You drop your needle in to the material. You do, that's great. But I forgot, I do this all the time. It's always popping out on me. This is a very good point to make, is that when you actually cut off your thread and you put it behind and through and underneath the presser foot, make sure that you leave enough, because when the machine pulls it, you'll actually keep just having to rethread it. So again, you line it up at the side, you drop your needle into it, do a couple of stitches forwards and backwards, and continue all the way down, lifting your presser foot, leaving the needle in the fabric, lining it back up again, and continuing. Again, finishing with a couple of stitches back and forward, lifting up, snipping off your excess thread, and leaving your flag to the side. So we'll continue that now with the whole 10 of them. Again, remember to leave enough thread so as when it flips up it doesn't actually unthread itself. So from the sewing machine, we've quickly sewn up our 10 flags. You can see lines of stitching. Now the next thing that we need to do is we take each individual flag, and right at the very tip, what we want to do is we want to trim off that point. And the reason why we're trimming off the point, now what we might do is we'll trim in a little bit here as well, and another little bit here, like so. Okay. Now we're trimming in here, just because what we want to do is we don't want to have a big bulk of fabric in that very point when we turn it. So we pop our bunting right way around, and using our chopstick, which I mentioned earlier, this is what we're going to pop the very top with. Okay, so this our little piece of fabric, we just leave them over there now, and that's what our piece of bunting is going to be like. Now, what we will do here is we will be taking these 10 pieces to the iron once I have chopped and turned all of them. One, two, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to be taking those, I'm going to finish these, and we're going to take these and we're going to go to the ironing board. And we're going to take these and we're going to press them flat just to give them a nice finish. Okay, so good warm iron, press flat. Okay. That's one done. Now what you will notice as we're pressing the flags flat is that we get these little edges here. Now before we actually insert these into the bias binding, we're going to be trimming those edges as well. But I'm just going to continue on. Now, okay, so that is our 10 pieces, and again you see it on the navy, these little pieces, and what we're going to do is we're going to snip them all off, very simply, snip. Now it is actually better to do this after you've ironed because you know exactly how much you need to snip off. So that's your 10 pieces of bunting ready to be put into the bias binding. Now I've taken the bunting that was hanging behind me down so as we can take a closer look at it. This is the one that I made previously, again using the same bias binding. It was 66 inches. And what I did with this one is I left 4-inch spaces in between each flag. And I only had 6 flags. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they sit like that. Now I decided with the one that we were making today that I'd like the flags actually to be closer together, actually right next to each other, and not have any spaces at all. So what I've done is I've allowed for 10 flags. This is the bias binding we have is 66 inches, and we have 10 flags that are each 6 inches each. So we have 6 plus 6. And we're going to lay them alternately in colour. Another 6, another 6. So the 10 sixes will total up to 60 inches. Our bias binding is 66 inches. So that means we will start with our first flag 3 inches in from the edge of the bias binding. Now I know that's not necessarily a huge amount of space to leave, particularly if you want to loop it or if you want to actually create a smaller loop. If you want, you can leave this as long as you want if you want to tie knots in it, bow it. What I usually do is I just use a thumbtack to press it into place. That's why I don't necessarily leave a huge amount. But again, this is optional. This is up to you. You can leave as much of this as you want. So obviously if you have 10 flags, 6 each, that's 60 inches. So your bias binding has to be 60 inches plus whatever length you want the actual loop or the bit you tie on to be. So I laid out my flags. I'm going to lay them all out like this. The next one is going to be that one. The next one's going to be this one. Then that one. Then this one. And I've down to this. Before I place my flags inside the bias binding, before I do that, I need to go back to the sewing machine. Now what I don't want is I don't want to leave a raw edge sitting there. So I get the bias binding, I open it up, I turn right side to right side, and very close to the edge here I'm just going to stitch a line of stitching straight up and down. My little scissors, snip off the excess threads, and I'm going to just snip it so as it's a little bit tight there, and I'm going to take it and turn it. And what happens here is you pop it out like that, and that's it, finished now. And we're going to repeat this again at the opposite end of the bias binding. Your bias binding is folded, you open it up, you place right side to right side, and you're going to take this to your sewing machine. You then place it flat and you're just going to sew a very small line of stitching as close as possible to the edge. Backwards and forwards to make sure it's nice and secure. Snip off your pieces of thread and leave your thread ready to start again. Okay, now what you will do here is you'll have a little bit of excess fabric, but you want to get a nice smooth turn. Snip it off and turn this right way out, and using the tip of your scissors and gently using the tip of your scissors, just push it out. You can also use the chopstick for that, but because it's such a small point, it might just be the scissors. Right, so that is the ends of your bias binding ready to go. All that's left is to position your flags internally inside the bias binding. Now, as we mentioned earlier, it's 60 inches in total, and what we've done is we've left 3 inches on either side. And because we've sewn in a little bit, we're going to say approximately 2.5 inches. So getting your measuring tape, measure in 2.5 inches from the edge of your bias binding. Take your first flag, position along there, take away, and what you're going to do is you're going to open your bias binding. You're going to position your flag inside like that. You're going to grab a pin, so it's nicely positioned inside. Grab a pin and you're going to pin in place. Right, again, nicely positioned, sitting inside. Grab your pin, pin in place. Repeat again for this one. Okay. So that is essentially your first flag in position. Right, now, unlike the one I showed you previously, where at this point I had the flag and I measured 4 inches across and positioned the next one, what I'm actually going to do with this one is I'm going to take the next flag and the excess threads, if you make sure they're gone, I'm going to position it right next to the first flag inside bias binding, position it flat, and again pin in position. Okay. Again, pin in position. Okay. And we're going to continue that process all the way along. As you can see here, what we've done is we've completely pinned all of our flags into the bias binding. You can see the whole 10 are now in there. Whole 10. They're just pinned in at the moment. So the last thing that we're going to do now is we're going to go to the sewing machine, and when we get to the sewing machine, we're just going to do a line of stitching, securing each flag in, taking out the pins as you go. Okay, taking out the pins as you go. Right, so we're going to go to the sewing machine. What we just want to do is we're going to stitch up along this line here, securing the flags inside the bias binding. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to position the bias binding. I'm just going to sew along here. I position it on the edge, starting at the finished edge. Now you remember we finished off this edge here and turned it, which means we don't have to do any sewing here. We literally just start on the edge and we're good to go. Drop the needle in. Now another thing that I'd like to point out right now is that each pin that's in here is actually, the head of the pin is facing me, because what I'm going to be doing is as I'm sewing along, I'm going to be taking the pin out and pinning it into my little pin cushion here, so as that I don't sew over the needle, I don't break the needle, I slow down. What you don't want to do is you don't want your foot, your presser foot or your needle to be hitting the pin. Okay, so we're going to start. couple of back stitches to begin with, and away we go. Again, we're going to be catching the flag in between the bias binding. When I get close to the pin, I remove the pin. Oops. Remove the pin, place of a pin cushion. And I continue on. Now be careful as you're going that none of the bits of your flag pop out. The place that you're going to need to be very careful with is in between where the two flags meet together. Again, we're at another pin. We'll remove the pin, place it here, keeping it flat, and continue to sew right over the two. Again, remove the next pin and continue sewing. Remove the pin. Again, be careful of your edges of your flags when it's crossing over from one to the other. And again, removing pin. Right, so we've just come from the sewing machine and we have completed our bunting. Yay! 10 flags, completely done and ready to go. Now I just need to figure out where I'm going to put these. We'd like to thank you for tuning into our first ever YouTube tutorial. We would love if you would subscribe. There'll either be a subscribe button right here, cha-ching, or it'll be down at the bottom of the screen down here. We're not sure yet because we're still learning what to do. And hopefully you'll tune back in and see us again for our next one.